know where there's some. Right here in the hall clerk.
No, Molly, not in there. I have
a And now we'll take a look at what we've got here. As I said, this is an classic All-American 5 radio, which means it works just like every one or other one of its ilk. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of these made because, number one, because they're cheap, and number two, the design is almost the same in each and every case. They all have 5 tubes. They almost all have 2 of these transformers. They don't look like transformers, but they are. Here's our tuning condenser. It's bent, I noticed, right there. That plate is bent, and that plate is bent. And that plate is bent, and that plate is bent. I doubt you can see that. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. Each one of these is an aluminum plate, and typically they're in parallel. They're exactly the same distance apart. But in this case, the outside one has been bent here and here, and again here and here. And that indicates to me that somebody was trying to align the dial. You can do some really fine tuning when you're setting these radios up by bending the outside elements of the tuning capacitors. But that's neither here nor there for this discussion. Okay, here's what's up front. We have a plain brown dirty, look at that. This will clean up nicely, I guess. Yeah, a lot of dirt. That's sweat from my brow, actually. Nice, clean, undamaged, scratch-free piece of tin here, brown in color, and that's what the station indicator slides back and forth on. And it's pulled back and forth by strings that are back in here, that are wrapped around here, wrapped around there, and wrapped around down here as well. So the strings look good, they're in place. This moves back and forth. Wouldn't touch it for all the tea, and well, that's an old saying. Wouldn't touch it. Now, let's find out if this radio is going to cost even more money. Here is the underside. Here's where old radio restoration hands say, what a mess, or it's unmolested. Unmolested is kind of a crudish term, meaning no one with their 100-watt soldering iron has gotten in here and tried to do anything. All these parts look original. It doesn't look like there have been any fires under here. It doesn't look like anybody has done anything, which is a big deal. This is really a nice radio. This radio, I will say it now, this radio can be repaired, not restored, but repaired so that it's in working condition pretty easily. And I say that because there are no smoke damage. All of these things, these capacitors, these are what we call leaky, waxy paper caps. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. They're all in place. They have not been replaced. You can read the values on them. And all we have to do to make this a repaired radio is replace every one of those. And this one right here. This one is an important one. you'll notice it has a wire coming out this end and two wires coming out that end. That means there are two capacitors in there, two electrolytic capacitors, and their job is to make the DC voltages that run around inside here nice and smooth, so that your radio doesn't hum at you all the time it's turned on with that 60 cycle hum that a lot of old radios do have. This one won't have that, or won't when we're done. It might have it now, but we're not going to find out. Now, why did I say we're not going to find out? There's no point in just plugging this radio in. It might work. It looks pretty clean. It looks like nothing's caught on fire. I'll show you in a minute the things that do catch my eye that say it's not quite as good as it appears to be. But it will, if it does work, and it might, but if it does work, it will work very, very poorly. It will make a lot of noise, it will hum, it might not be able to turn in anything but your most local stations. And that's all because of these guys, this big electrolytic and these waxy paper capacitors that are scattered throughout here. These guys fail. They fail. They have failed. This was built in 1948. They're as old as I am. They have failed, like some of me. So if you're going to repair Uncle Bob's radio and make it sound as the best you can without knowing anything about what's actually going on in here, you're going to have to replace these. So let's talk about what it takes to replace these. Well, it takes a soldering iron. I've got one right here. This is mine. It's a brandless, I don't see any brand. It's a brandless soldering iron with an adjustable temperature tip. I got this on Amazon or eBay, Amazon I think, for I don't know, $8-10. This is your next investment. So we've got two investments so far. We've got a tube, we've got a soldering iron. We've got solder we have to invest in. Solder wire. This is not a bad size. It's a little thicker than I like to use. Here's an old Radio Shack. Look for the words rosin core. Do not try to use the words acid core. Acid core solder is not for electronics. Acid core solder will fail mightily. So look for plain old rosin core solder, or you can look for lead. This has lead in it, 60% lead, 40% tin. Or you can get a solder like this that's lead free. If you're really concerned about your lungs, I would go for the lead-free solder. It doesn't cost that much more, and it works as well. It works equally as well. So lead-free solder. So soldering iron. The last thing I would say is this thing. This is a and you can get by without this, and we might even try to do that because there's plenty of room in here for us to work on it. I think we'll try to get by without using this. We'll set this aside. What this does is it absorbs solder. If you put it on an old solder joint, like you're taking the components out, put it on an old solder joint under there, and the old solder gets sucked up onto this. You cut it off and suck it off until, or keep bleeding the old solder off until it's all gone, and you can take the wire loose and remove the old part. I think we'll try to do without that. So your investment is a tube, soldering iron, solder. And that's it for investments, I think. Yeah. Anyway, you can get these at your local hardware store. You can get them on Amazon, eBay, corner flea market. Don't get ones that are, oh, let me show you one. This one is too much soldering iron. This is a Weller, 60 watt, I think. It has a very large tip. This is kind of a specialty iron. First of all, it gets very, very hot. It will solder things onto a chassis, which this absolutely would not do because it's low power. This is a 60 watt iron. You can actually solder things onto a chassis like this. So this is way too much soldering iron. You want something more like this in the, what would be 30 watt range. 30 maybe, 25, 30, 35, 40. I like this one because it allows me to adjust the temperature up and down. For very delicate work, you want to have a fairly low temperature. For things that are in here, we'll probably want a temperature around 350 C, which I can pick out on this soldering iron. So this is a beautifully not damaged old radio. It's a classic design. They work, fine. Not the greatest radio in the world by far, but cheap to build. Everybody in there had one in their house at one point or another in the United States prior to television. It's clean. No one has been into it and messed it up. This is a good candidate. If Uncle Bob gave you this radio, he gave you a good candidate for you to be able to repair it with only a soldering iron and some solder. Oh, and a pair of these. Clippers and a pair of fairly fine needle nose pliers like this. You'll need those too. So here's the list of all the things you'll need to get started on this project. If Uncle Bob gave you a radio that looks like this,
The makers of Johnson's Wax.